to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and that recording will be subsequently available for public listening. Do we have a Sederunt and apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe we've got 14 members present. I have apologies from Councillor Tate and Councillor Wiper.
Thank you. Any other apologies?
Councillor Dempster.
Okay. That's fine. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Moving on. Item 3, minute of meeting of 28th of May. This is purely for noting and has already been to full council. Are we happy to note? Yep. And item 4, minutes of meeting of 6th of June. Again, for noting as it's already been to full council. Are we happy? Okay, moving on to item 5, Education Services Revenue Budget 2012-13 outturn report. We have Karen McNish to speak to this report. Do you have anything further to add?
I suppose I would just like to highlight that this is a very positive position for the service, and although it may seem like a high figure, it is only 0.36% of the budget, and it's very low compared to maybe some other services, and it is a good achievement considering the amount of savings we've had to make, and is a lot to do with our forward planning to deliver the savings for 2013-14. Thanks.
Members? Councillor Lever.
The improvement in the teacher absence rate is very much to be welcomed. And I think what would be an interesting exercise from the point of view of the committee, and I think this has been mentioned before, if we can actually see whether this is partially due to the new schools. You know, obviously it's a much better working environment for the staff, so we should be able to link that in historically with the schools which you directly replace. So I think that might be an interesting exercise if someone's got some spare time. The supply teaching costs. I have heard anecdotally that because of the change in the conditions, pay conditions for supply teachers, which was introduced by the Scottish Government, it's getting difficult in some areas to recruit supply teachers. So if we could have some background to that. 3.8, the additional support for learning psychology services, the one-off vacancy saving, is that having an effect on the service which is being delivered? Are youngsters having to wait longer in order to be assessed? And 3.10, the increase in the number of families claiming clothing grants, is this likely to be affected by the welfare reform as that starts to kick in? And finally, be grateful to hear the table at the top of 15, it refers to other reserves. What are other reserves?
Karen?
With the psychology one, I'll maybe let Colin get back on to later. The clothing grants, we have had our highest number of grants received in the last 12 years. And I think welfare reform will more than likely have an impact on that budget going forward. Regarding the other reserves you mentioned at the table at the top of page 15, quite a significant amount of that has been set aside to support the secondary schools in their management restructure, which started at August 2012, and we've agreed support for them through to 2015, obviously because it can take some time to get the changes bedded in. There's also just amounts that have not yet been allocated, particularly in relation to alternatives to exclusion. Obviously, we need to support our schools in keeping the exclusion rates to a minimum, and there's also some money allocated in there to support the council print strategy, because the schools now have to purchase all their printers and photocopiers up front, which obviously a lot of our smaller schools don't have the capacity to do. So we pay them up front for them and let them pay us back over a period of 3 years. Hope that helps justify that.
Director, do you want to pick up on the other point?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On the other 2 points, you're absolutely right on the supply issue. It's more than anecdotal. I mean, we've got quite a bit of evidence. We've done a survey alongside within the LNCT, alongside the unions, to check what the supply situation is. It's more acute down in the west, I have to say, but each area has had some difficulties in terms of recruiting supply. The question is whether that directly relates to the fact that the conditions and payment for supply teachers, whether it's because of that or not, but I think that's bound to be a factor, and that's something that's been looked at nationally. The challenge is that nationally the agreement with the SNCT to reduce payments for supply staff was part of protecting numbers of jobs, because savings were made through that. So I think that at the SNCT level they're going through some difficult decisions around that agenda, and really we'll implement whatever comes through there. But there certainly it hasn't been particularly easy getting supply, and I'm actually very pleased therefore that absence rates have been down, or that would have made it more acute. As far as the psychology service goes, no, there's no evidence there's been any change there in terms of certainly in terms of outcomes for children. If you look through the ABB, you'll see the outcomes for children and the authority have been very positive and strong over a period of time.
You happy with that, Councillor Lever? Yep. Councillor Diggle.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, you've got to be commended on the budget side of things. My only concern was the fact that we've got 94k underspend on the additional support for learning, which I understand from the report's a one-off vacancy. What I was going to ask the Director is just to ask him whether we have actually got the necessary resources to diagnose and cope with such conditions as dyslexia and other learning difficulties, and whether we are channeling resources to cope with those particular needs.
Director.
I think my answer would be a subjective one there, because you could never have enough resources to some extent. In a way, you would like every single one of our 18,000 children to get one-to-one support. So, arguably, I would say, again, if you look at the overall outcomes for children, which are positive, I think we're channeling and targeting finances appropriately. This committee has been a champion of ensuring that the ESL agenda was as spared as possible from the difficult budget cuts that have been over the last 3 years. We have increasing demand at ESL level. There is more diagnosis, so we can certainly argue that we've put quite a lot of resources into diagnosis, but there's therefore always more demand around that area. I think we've got the balance correct at the moment, but I think there will certainly be challenges to come over the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you for that. Not Councillor Lever, Councillor Nicholson, sorry.
Thank you. It's just a reaction on 3.7, the mentions overspend, it also mentions underspend. But this actual underspend on staff costs, was this due to the supply work as well? And in 3.9, it's this is cross-sectoral. Can you explain what the in-house delivery of school and college links is? I thought we were advocating an increased use of colleges. It seems to be an argument for the so-called super school up there.
I'll let the Director pick up on the last point, and then Karen can pick up on the first one.
The 3.7 would include staff costs overall, because the actual overspend around SQA is more than 23,000, you're quite right, but that's partially offset by some of the staff cost savings that you mentioned. The 3.9 is nothing whatsoever to do with any super school, Dumfries Learning Town or anything. It's just factual that over the last number of years, using DTS funding, which had been ring-fenced, there was what might have been argued to be a relatively inefficient use of some of that, because an awful lot of the money went simply on busing kids up and down. So there was an awful lot of money spent on transport, and there was an awful lot of money and time spent by children sitting on buses while getting to the college and back. And I think we've been trying to be quite innovative with the college. It's only a part of the 297, but be much more innovative, a bit more outreach programmes and colleges coming out and individuals coming out, and that's been a more efficient approach, is my understanding of that section.
Do you have the same point? Just on the same point?
Yep.
Yeah, it says me coming in, because I was going to raise, because we did discuss earlier on in the year about the situation, I think it was Annan Academy, where it raised where they weren't being given the opportunity. So can you just confirm that that outreach is happening at Annan Academy?
I can't confirm that today, but I'll certainly get an email back to you just to check where we are with that one.
Karen, did you have anything to pick up on Councillor Nicholson's points?
Just on clarification on the secondary, like reduced staff costs, an element of that was supply teaching, because I think that's been evidenced across all sectors, but also last year there was quite a few vacancies in non-teaching in secondaries, which obviously aren't replaced during recruitment. So because of recruitment delays, we did get some savings in that area too.
Thank you for that. Are you quite happy with that, Councillor Nicholson? Yeah. Councillor McKee and then Councillor McComb.
Aye, thanks, Chair. It's in 3.9 as well, but it's Homework Worker Family Learning Service. There's been vacancy savings in that service. Have these positions now been filled, or are we able to cope without filling the vacancy?
Karen?
Actually, those vacancies were put up as savings for 2013-14. They were part of the savings proposals.
And Councillor McComb.
Thanks, Chair. In 3.3, there is a reference to one-off savings being achieved in preparation for 2013-14 savings. Now, we've been told about the one-off saving in ASL with regard to a vacancy. Are there other one-off savings as well?
Director?
Yeah, I mean, Karen might be able to say more on this. Basically, what we're really saying here is that where savings have been put forward and agreed for 2013-14, if a member of staff has left the service, you know, maybe halfway through this year, then we've held on to that as a vacancy management issue, because we're going to have to do without that member of staff or that FTE from the start of 2013-14, because some people have left earlier than the start of the financial year. That's brought about more than additional savings. Is that okay?
That clarified, yeah. Pardon me, Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Chair. 3 points I'd like to bring up. One is 3.6 primary sector 56k overspend, cleaning and rates expenditure, it says. 3.7 SQA expenditure. Now, my thoughts would be, and you indicated or you answered earlier on that the 23k was the net figure in that particular department, not the gross figure. So SQA expenditure must have been higher. I would have thought these were both reasonably easy things to budget for, and you know, you've overspent on them. And my last one is devolved school management. Does that mean there's 2.4 million sitting slushing about somewhere that nobody's using? And if it is, how does a devolved school management work? Could you explain that to me?
Director.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, if we pick up on each one, I'll maybe ask Karen to say something about the cleaning costs, okay? Again, bearing in mind that the overall primary sector spending is, I think, about £46 million. 56,000 is a really, really tiny percentage of that. However, I'll ask Karen to say something about the cleaning costs. In the secondary, there's an overspend in SQA, but part of the reason why it's difficult to budget at the moment is because Curriculum for Excellence is coming in. A number of our schools came from a background of presenting early at the end of third year. They're going through that transition at the moment. We're expecting that to disappear out of the system, and in fact we probably expect our SQA costs to come down overall, even though the SQA might keep the fees at the same stage. But because it's transitional, we haven't adjusted significantly materially the overall budget. It's a relatively small amount. In terms of DSM, what I think this committee has supported in the past is more autonomy and more strategic management from head teachers. And what we've said to head teachers is, yes, they need to keep within the 2.5% limit that's set, but we would want them to be very prudent at this stage, given the challenges that are ahead, and we want them to build in capacity for the future. And it's not money slushing around, I would say, that's not been committed, but it is a case that if, for example, I was coming to you and saying that we were 2.4 million overspent in DSM, that would be a horrific position. It's quite the opposite, and I would like to think our head teachers have managed the budget well and have put monies aside or committed to things that will have a sustainable impact in the future.
Karen, did you want to pick up on the primary sector question?
With regards to the cleaning, it is mainly in the materials side of the budget, and I think it's mainly to do with there was a saving taken in that area, it was about 2 years ago, and I think they maybe are struggling to sustain that, but we're certainly reviewing it going forward. And the rates expenditure was in relation to BTUC, because obviously the newer schools have a higher rateable value, but there's currently a corporate review going on to hopefully make realign the budgets for 13-14, so this issue shouldn't arise again.
Thank you for that. I have no further members wishing to speak. Councillor Nicholson, would you like to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. Just on 3.11, I understand what you're saying about you can spend money that's underspent and you can spend it in other areas. And we've got an underspend of £545,000. Where exactly is that money going? I think you refer to Appendix 2, but is Appendix 2, the money for Appendix 2 is already allocated, is it?
Karen?
Actually, in the Appendix 2, if you look on the drawdown to date or adjustments, that shows you where that £545 been allocated to. And obviously there's reductions from that because there's been allocations out of reserves as well. So certainly that shows you where that's came from. And although all the reserves have been put aside for a specific purpose, we can't hold a reserve unless it has been committed to delivering a certain service or initiative.
I think there's particular earmarked committed funds that have also been through either Policy and Resources or through Council recently.
Yeah, it was agreed at Policy and Resources on the 20th of June.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks. So one, what you're saying is it is in Appendix 2 that the money is getting spent. It's maybe just me not picking up right. But, where's the rest of that money coming from? And when we actually get a breakdown of what the money is actually spent on in relation, for example, the Learning Town Dolbeatty project, will we actually get breakdowns of where that money is?
Yeah, in that particular example, in both cases, both in terms of Dolbeatty and upfront costs, but particularly in terms of the Learning Town, any business case that comes forward will have to demonstrate what upfront costs have been utilised. One real positive in that, of course, is that if any project eventually goes forward, there's an expectation that some of those costs can be capitalised retrospectively, and that in fact might afford some opportunities for the committee in terms of funding. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
And when's that likely to come?
Well, the business case is due to come in front of this committee in the first place on the 13th of December. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Do I have any further members wishing to speak? No, we'll move to the recommendations. Are we happy to note an underspend at 2.1 of 545,000 delivered by Education Services for financial year 2012-2013? Happy to note. And at 2.2 that this underspend has been transferred to earmarked committed funds as detailed in Appendix 2. Happy to note. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Okay, moving on to item 6. We're being asked if we're happy to receive a presentation on the activities-based budget information, which I believe the Director is going to do. So I will pass over to him just now and then just open the floor to members for scrutiny and questions of this particular report. Director.
Thanks, Chair. Members, the activity-based budgeting information Appendix 2 provides really a great deal of detail and a lot of figures around how money is spent in Dumfries and Galloway's education services, and I think importantly as well what sort of impact that's having in certain areas. There is a lot of detail, a lot of figures, and whilst we're all capable of working our way through that, I thought it might be helpful if I was able to provide a wee bit of an overview that attempted to do two things for you. One, to draw out some really key statistics around the big picture and proportions. And secondly, give a brief commentary around the 6 service areas in relation to spend issues. I'd also like to maybe say something at the end about service reviews. So the first task is really to look at the big picture. I want to use some approximations here. Clearly the exact detailed figures are in Appendix 2, but in terms of approximations it gives maybe, hopefully helpfully for members, a sense of proportion around where the monies are spent. So in education we're spending approximately £130 million as the controllable budget. That constitutes 42% of the Council's controllable budget of £309 million. So it's a very significant section of the Council's budget. If you go into the detail, what you'll actually find is it splits the following way, okay? So £6 million for preschool, approximately, £44 million for primary, £49 million for secondary, £2.5 million for children's integration, £6 million for other additional support for learning. That's what goes on out with the school environment. £14.5 million for PPP, unitary costs, £3.5 million for the Directorate, that's the Education Officers and Service centrally, and £3 million for other support services. If I broke that down to percentage for you, top to bottom, again, just to give a sense of proportion, 38% of the £130 million is spent in secondary, so 38% in secondary, 35% in primary, 11% in PPP, 5% ASL, 4.5% preschool, 3% Directorate, 2% other support and 2% in integration. So that maybe gives you a bit of a flavour of the proportions in the way the money is spent. We also have commissions, 3 commissions, one for roughly £5 million for transport, one for £3 million for school meals, and one for £1.75 million for facilities management. Now again, as members try to fully understand how the budget's presented, what we're trying to do here is really present it in a way that's most effective for you, making considerations for things moving forward. That's the sort of big picture. If you were to look at it in a different way of what you're actually spending the money on rather than the areas it's spent on, 70% of the £130 million is on staff. So that's 70%. 11%, this is again in descending order, 11% is on PPP, unitary costs. 9% is on property. 6% is on payments to other bodies. 3.5% is on supplies, services and admin, and 0.5% is on transport. It might be helpful if I said a wee bit about payments to other bodies, and then a wee bit about the nearly £2 million of income that we've got. Payments to other bodies is between 5.5 and 6% of our 130 million cost. Those payments are preschool payments of 1.35 million. Those are preschool session payments that we pay to other providers. SQA costs are £800,000. ASL residential placements are £953,000. EMA clothing grants are £884,000, although some of that's offset from income from the government. And lastly, £771,000 is Aberlour Crannog. So there's really 5 main parts to the payments to other bodies. It breaks down that way, and that constitutes the 5% of costs that we have, 5.5%. We also, members, have about nearly 2 million, about £1.9 million worth of income. Where that comes from is the EMA income that comes from the government and offsets payments against the ones that we make. Government grant and trainee teachers is £242,000. Other grants that come in, like Wyatt Youth Music Initiative, summer schooling, which is ring-fenced, that comes to £417,000. Fees from other local authorities, inter-authority fees, is £235,000. School lets, £96,000. Secondment income, so where we might have some staff who are seconded to, for example, SQA or Education Scotland, we've got 125,000, and then other fees that we bring in, for example, instrumental lease, etc., comes to £85,000. So that's a relatively small amount, the 1.9 million, but that's how that's broken up. Those are all the big picture figures around the costs and the income and the payments to other bodies. What I thought I would do then, just very briefly, is without going into too much detail, because that's in the ABB, take you through the 6 service areas and give a very brief commentary on each one. What I could do, members, is continue to do that just now, or stop for a moment and take questions in the first section, since I've been speaking for some time. I'm in members' hands in that.
Thank you for that. What do members feel? Would you like the director just to open the floor now and maybe pick up on any issues? I think that was very useful, but I know my eyes were rolling. I can't write and take that in at a decent speed, and I wonder if we could maybe have that information emailed out to the Education Committee after this meeting, and then at least we'll have that more detailed information. Councillor Gilroy.
It would have been helpful if it was actually here, if they're into us before the director spoke to it.
Noted.
Chair, just if I could say, just because I know this meeting's been recorded, all of that information is indeed in ABB, everything's in there, and is available for you to work out the figures. I really was just trying to bring out some simplicity around it, but that information is there, and I certainly wouldn't have spoken to that if you didn't already have that information.
No, I appreciate that. I think that the beauty is that you've condensed it into a sort of shorter bullet point list, which might actually be handy for members just to have as an overview. So I think if that can be emailed out, that would be useful. Okay. Duly noted, Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Gilroy.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. What actually pinged out there to me, though, Mr. Grant, was the school lets. I do wonder if there isn't room for improvement and increased revenue with regard to school lets. I have a sneaking suspicion that quite a lot of the new PPP schools, particularly, are not being fully integrated into community life in some places, and that there is a little sort of fiefdom going on in some of them, that they're only there for education. And I just wonder, if that's a way that perhaps there could be some money made rather than cuts.
Chair, I think that's quite a complicated issue, because we know that there's a 25%, a commitment to 25% reduction in non-school properties that we have in the council over the coming period of time. That's bound to mean more community engagement and use of our schools, which is a terrific thing. Whether that would be around the agenda of raising more money, I'm not quite so sure. Certainly we've standardised the let costs. We actually dropped the costs of our lets to try and standardise it with community use. So the agenda has never really been about raising very significant income, but more about more community use. I do agree with you that I think there could be more community use, and that would be part of a sort of view alongside community services as we move forward.
I think just on that point, that this has been raised at a number of committees and on a number of occasions, and we're sort of not punching above our weight in terms of particularly the new PPP schools. And I think perhaps as an education committee, it's time that we sort of remitted a better press campaign, better community engagement, and an understanding that these facilities are available and the fees have been harmonised. And actually they're as cheap to hire now as any other council facility. But we haven't done that, so I think it's maybe up to the communications unit with a direction from us to do that. Sorry, Councillor Nicholson? Did you want to? Oh, it's Councillor Lever this time.
Yeah, on the subject, I hadn't made some sort of calculations whilst I was in the garden watching the men's tennis final on Sunday. I mean, the amount of income at 87,000 according to the analysis of income. That's 0.06% of the total education budget. You know, it's tiny, and that's the gross income. Presumably, there's also a cost involved in administering the income. So I think there's still an outstanding report to this committee on the charging policy for school lets, and I think that was asked under last administration. It still hasn't come forward. So I think we do need to actually look at how much money we're actually bringing in this, because what we don't want is these very expensive facilities standing unused effectively for a lot of the time. And if it is just because we are charging for it, then perhaps we should look at whether we do need to charge for it if we're not actually making any money out of it. I mean, it takes me back to the blue badge, where it actually turned out that in order to levy, it was a £5 charge. It would have cost something like £20 for each blue badge we issued. The same could be true in terms of the schoolettes. And I think there's a general feeling amongst all members and quite a lot of officers that we want to make much more of our community facilities, particularly in these straitened times, and get them used all the time, because if they are part of the community, you get less vandalism, etc. So, there are big savings in terms of that. And just doing some rough calculations, at 31,000 for the primary sector, if the rental charge is £10 an hour, that means on average each school is being rented for 36 minutes a week. It's sort of ridiculous. Doing the same calculation for the 16 secondary schools, and it's 7 hours per week. And these are big schools, you could be using an awful lot more. So I do think we should drive forward this report on charging policy and what the options are as quickly as possible. As I say, it's been outstanding for at least 15 months, possibly 18 months.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we should be sort of pricing ourselves out of a market when there could possibly be a lot of demand, particularly we are closing down other facilities within communities.
Thank you very much. I think you'll get complete agreement with that, and certainly the fees were harmonised. I think it was April 2011, which is over 2 years ago now, and we're probably overdue a joint report maybe between leisure and sport and education to show us the use in the schools. And certainly some of the PPP schools are being used very well, but others are not, and I think that we need to address that in a report post-recess if that's possible. Thank you. Councillor Lever?
Could we have some figures in terms of how much we're actually earning from this? So, strip out the gross figure and take it down to the net income.
I think Mr Crichton's taken this down. Good. Okay, I have Councillor McComb.
Thank you, Chair. Could you clarify, in the case of PPP schools, who the let income actually goes to?
Karen?
Don't quote me on this, but I think it is the council. I'll double check.
It's tied up and it's slightly complicated around the number of hours which we. I think it's in two parts, okay. And again, do quote me on this, but if I'm not absolutely 100% accurate, I'll clarify and get back to you. But it's based around two parts. Part of in the PPP contract, there are a number of hours that are for use, okay, that are free to use within the monies that we pay around the unity charges. And therefore, if we take lets within that, that would come to the council. If we want to use beyond those number of hours that are agreed globally, that would go to the contractors. So I think it's in two sections.
Is it on that point, Councillor Lever?
I remember this coming up at a previous education meeting, because I think we actually get a rebate if we don't use all the hours, because I remember the Heath Hall School, there was a big underuse of the hours there, and did mention that we get a rebate, which is a bit of a tension within the system, as it were.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl?
Yeah, and thanks, Chair. In your speech, Director, you quoted a lot of percentages. For example, 42% of the council budget is spent on education. I'm not disputing any of those figures, but is there any indication if this is a common percentage, or if these percentages you quoted are common with our comparable authorities?
Yeah, I think we're pretty well on the sort of average. Our costs, and this was where I was going to come into just a wee bit of discussion around the 6 service areas. Costs in education are pretty comparative. However, the cost per school, for example, is significantly higher than the average for schools across the country. Cost per pupil for schooling, and that relates to the fact that we've got a lot of small schools in rural areas. Clearly, if you're not a rural area, in terms of economy of scale, and kids not need to be transported as far, then the costs are significantly different. So, for example, the cost per pupil in the primary schools is around £5,300 per pupil on average, compared to a national average of £4,000. That makes us 29th out of 32 in terms of local authorities, but you would expect that to be in because we're among the 5 most rural authorities in the country. So some of those comparative figures I think are quite interesting and do appear in the ABB.
Councillor Witts.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for lateness, a minor crisis I won't bore you with. I would like to look at page 30 of the section regarding the method of provision of preschool education, and specifically the second paragraph where it says, although there are statutory requirements associated with the provision of preschool education, there is a local discretion regarding the level and approach of the provision. I would seek more clarity on the level and approach. I would assume that we would be allowed flexibility in terms of who delivers it and perhaps in the hours, but I'm a wee bit puzzled about level and approach. What these words, could I have some clarity, please?
Director?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's no, in terms of statutory duty, there's no flexibility in terms of the number of hours that we need to offer and have as an entitlement to young people. You know at the moment it's 475 hours, and that will rise to 600 hours in one form or another from August 2014. Where the flexibility arises is, as you say, who delivers it. And secondly, there's clearly flexibility in, for example, the level of staffing that one provides. So you might have smaller class sizes and also or greater, but there's no flexibility around the statutory duty, which is the number of hours that every child is entitled to, and we certainly adhere to that.
Councillor Lever.
Well, on the back, I'd say it also says that no details have been announced by the Scottish Government with regard to additional funding. I mean, is there any doubt that this could be funded by the Scottish Government? I mean, it was their manifesto commitment that they were going to do this, and I can't really see how we as an education authority can absorb such a large increase in our costs. And will there be any capital costs as well? Because obviously you've got to fit all these kids into the schools for about 30% more time, so do we have any capital expenditure associated?
Director, do you want to pick up on the last
Yeah,
one?
my understanding of the current position is, and it also relates to the consultation that's going on around the, and detailed amendments that might come around the Children and Young People's Bill. Around the 600 hours, all authorities were asked to put in an estimate, a sort of minimal and maximum estimate around what we thought it might cost depending on how you model the 600 hours. My understanding is, at this stage, is that government has taken all of the contributions or estimates that have been put in by all of the local authorities, and it may well be to look at an average cost and provide that, because it depends on what model you put forward. But there is an expectation that there will be funding coming from the Scottish Government to increase.
Just to pick up on that point, I attended COSLA fairly recently, and there was the figures weren't touted at the time, but there was a guarantee that the 600 hours over and above the 475 would be covered by the Scottish Government. And in addition to that, there would be sufficient budget put aside on a sort of proportional regional basis for the teaching of a second modern language in primary schools. So I think there's an assurance from the Scottish Government on those two particular budget pressures, which is good. Okay, Councillor Lever.
And the capital costs, have we any idea whether we will incur capital costs?
There would appear to be still a degree of flexibility about how we might model things, so we wouldn't anticipate that happening necessarily. I'm presuming that we would be looking to model things around what the families need. Part of the issue will be a broad consultation that will be coming forward to you. I was going to mention this under service review, but there will be a broad consultation with parents and families about what they think they need around the childcare and the early years preschool agenda. And based on that, we would be then looking to model the service to provide. But clearly, you would still be wanting to do that in a best value way, and look at the existing provision that we've got and try to fit that fairly well. So we've got no indication at this stage that we would have any additional capital costs.
Do I have any further members? Councillor Diggle.
Thank you, Chair. With the increasing use of biomass boilers within the schools, I can't see any income stream from them. Are we getting the income, or the contractors, or?
My understanding is there's been a bit of a disaster, but I will pass to the director.
I wouldn't make a subjective comment on that. What I'll say is that I'll find that out from Property Services and email you directly. Okay.
He's a bit more subtle than I am, I think. Do you have any further members wishing to speak? Councillor Lever.
Just clarification of the process. Are we going to go through this document section by section?
Page by page.
Yeah.
If you'd like the director just to give a bit on each section. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. So on to the second part of the presentation really was just to give a very brief overview of each of the 6 service areas. There's a lot of detail in there. I don't want to read each part out for you or pick up every part, but I'll just pick out, I think, some key, perhaps, issues related to each one and spend issues. In preschool, as we've said before, the authority has a duty to make the 475 hours of preschool education available to every child from the school term following their 3rd birthday. However, we know that the Children and Young People's Bill is expected to increase this provision to 600 hours from August/September 2014. The provision is currently delivered through nurseries in 44 schools throughout the region and also through session payments paid to private preschool providers. You might note from looking at the detail in the ABB that there's been a wee bit of a move towards more efficiency from our point of view, and there's been a slight increase in the number of youngsters proportionately who use their own nurseries rather than private providers. But there's still quite, I think, a healthy blend there. The big issue around preschool will certainly be the much wider agenda that includes childcare and all of the issues that are in the Children and Young People's Bill. That, as I said, will begin with the consultation with parents, and then we'll open up to quite a major service review that we will bring to this committee that looks at the scope in the widest sense, because it won't only be education. On primary schools, there are currently 103 primary schools with a school roll of 10,419. Since 2001, we've seen a reduction in pupil numbers year on year. However, as you would see from the graphs, since 2011, the pupils numbers are beginning to increase again. Attendance in our and I suppose this is a wee bit about how we spend our money and how effective it is. Attendance in the primary schools is higher than the national average and comparative authorities, and the exclusions are significantly lower. The early indications from our standardised testing is that we're doing pretty well, actually, in the literacy area, but we can improve. The big focus is around numeracy, and that's what we've made our major focus in the education department for the year, and we expect that there's some headroom there, and we expect to see improvement. And lastly, around that is the thing that I mentioned earlier, that actually, in terms of cost, our average cost per pupil is 5,300 compared to 4,000 nationally, and that relates to the fact that we've got so many small schools in our rural authority. That's primary.
Councillor Gilroy, did you want to pick up a point on that?
I was just going to ask, but it's just quite interesting. What's the take-up on preschool children? When you get to primary, I mean, children have got to go to primary school, but it's a purely voluntary thing, the preschool one, and I just wondered if the take-up of that is having a good effect, obviously, hopefully, on primary school attainment and all the rest of it. But I just wondered what the percentage.
99%, which I think is quite healthy. 99%. It is voluntary, but you can see that that's the uptake, which is really significant, and we would see that coming through in attainment as we benchmark and take the pattern forward. Yep.
Excellent. Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. On a preschool, you've got the session payment of £975, and we're the highest of 13 councils sampled, and that was in 2010-11. But although there's no direct payment to other areas, they're getting it in kind. Have you any idea what the difference is on that basis? And another question I wanted to ask you was, D&G AFE as at April 2013, whatever that is, why has P7's reading, general maths, mental arithmetic and developed ability dropped from P5? You brought some right folk with you today, pair souls.
Sorry, is the microphone on?
Is that better now? Yeah. Members have seen the maths and mental arithmetic information in a number of forums over the last year. Certainly it does appear to be decreasing. P3 is strong, P5 is strong, P7 dips, and then our most recent S2 is very strong. So we feel that it's either that youngsters have perhaps, could they have lost focus with the excitement of going on to secondary school? Could it be that their speed of recall is not as sharp as it could be because they've not done their tables since primary 5? Or could it be that they're benchmarked against a UK average with English youngsters who are preparing for their standardised assessment in England? So we don't know, but we know that 1, 3, 5 and 2 are strong and that our P7 results are 2% better than they were last year. So it's certainly headroom for improvement and we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you for that.
Chair,
sorry.
Could I just add to that as well? We're certainly not complacent about it, and that's why the single biggest focus this year in the primary schools has been numeracy and mathematics. And we've actually just fairly recently produced materials around mental maths that most other authorities have asked us for. They're in all of our schools. We're really determined to drive that agenda forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor McKee?
Have you any indication of the costs for preschool, how we compare with other areas? As I say, we're £9.75, which was supposedly the highest of 13 councils. But there's other councils, the rates are between £8 and £9.47. But they're getting other support in kind. Does that make up the difference in the cost?
I think if Hugh were here, Hugh Smith were here, he would probably tell you that was the case. I think he has always, and we have always found it fairly complicated and complex trying to establish all of the different aspects because some of the in-kind can be to do with the rental accommodation, it can be to do with the support and curricular support that we already give, and some of that's quite hard to break down. Certainly the basic session cost that we pay to our providers is strong, however.
Thank you. Councillor Lever?
It's the exclusion per 1,000 pupils. I mean, I've made a big improvement in that. It's now down to 7 per 1,000, which is well below the national average. How does that break down in numbers of pupils? Because obviously this is individual exclusion. It's not the number of individuals who have been excluded. So it's a small hard core of youngsters who have been excluded on multiple occasions, or is it general?
Director?
Yeah, it's fairly proportionate. We've got another forum. Those sort of figures and those details of breakdowns that have come through in the, for example, I think the Standards and Quality Report. I can send that and just redirect you towards that. Proportionately, it will be similar. You know, there will be some kids who are off for quite a long time or excluded for a long period. What I can say that's really interesting, and it's not simply anecdotal. I know that when I started as director about 5 years ago, that I would often have to sign off letters for what we call 10 plus exclusions, 10 plus days. So if a school required to, or if an exclusion was likely to last more than 10 days for any individual, then we really had to look at the reasons why that was. And I would have to say that weekly I was signing those off 5 years ago. This year I've probably seen 7 or 8 of them in the whole year. So I think there's both a big drop in terms of individuals with long-term exclusions and a big drop overall. It's really quite significant, and you'll see the same in secondary.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to secondary, I think.
If I pick up secondary schools, then there are currently 16 secondary schools, as you know, with a school roll of 8,700 pupils. School rolls in our secondary schools have recently been reducing year on year and are expected to do so until 2017. That, of course, is countered by the increase at primary coming up at the bottom. So we've gone through that dip and we're beginning to come out of the other side, certainly flattening out. Based on Solus benchmarking, we are ranked 27th of 32, again, on the cost per pupil, again, due to small, we've got on average pretty small secondary schools. The irony, I suppose, round that is it is more expensive, but in terms of outcomes for children and attainment values, they're really, really strong compared to the rest of the country, but it is more expensive to run smaller secondary schools, and particularly out in the more rural areas, it's quite difficult to know how to do much other than that, because the distance that would have to bus children would be quite significant. Attainment in the secondary schools, and again, this is what we spend our money on, is making sure that attainment, achievement, participation grows for kids. Attainment in secondary schools has been very good over the last couple of years, above national and comparator authority averages. In fact, last year there was an increase in 10 of the 12 measured areas, averaging 22% increase. Secondary.
Councillor Nicholson?
Thank you, Chair. Before we go on, I know we're talking about 6 services within education, but what I'm not clear about is why is there no service reviews in the paper itself? It was a clear decision of the council that there would be papers brought back with service reviews. PH&E have done it. They had 5 actual service reviews with details, with options of 5, 10, 15%. And I can't see a service review in here. I mean, I think it was in item 5, 3.5 or something, it's mentioned something like £2.9 million. And the reality is, the Education Department has got to save over £13 million in 2 years. And are we actually saying that we're going to do that without having a service reviews and without us having a look at it? It was quite clear to me that, the details were supposed to come back to this committee to agree. Now, we can't agree something that's not there. It was to give us options. And if we wanted, when we had them, we could say yes, or we could say, well, we want something else in it. But until we get one, we can't do the other. And the details aren't in this paper. So I don't know why the Education Department thinks it doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, certainly. Give a very clear answer on that one. And I think it said at the beginning I would cover service reviews at the end. There aren't any service reviews in front of you at this stage for 2 reasons. One, in fact, there are 3 reasons. One, the first one being that bringing about savings wouldn't always necessarily be delivered through service reviews. It might be reductions in what you're actually doing, or in fact it may be through efficiencies. And not every part of our service lends itself to a full-blown service review. The second reason is that we're in the middle of completing 3 service reviews, which began well before the new template came into play, and at a stage before we indicated a savings with that. Those 3, as you know, is how we manage our primaries. There have been a really extensive review over the last 2 years on the cluster working review. We've come to a phase with it where we've finished and agreed the policy going forward, but the actual implementation of that will require a lot of capacity over the next 6 months and beyond as we implement that. The second review that we're in the middle of is the Dumfries Borough Review, in terms of how we deliver education right across Dumfries and how that impacts elsewhere. And we've also got ongoing a support staff review, which is about halfway through, that looks at all the clerical and administrative support and officer support across the service. So all of those 3 were well underway before recent decisions were taken around service reviews. Those all are requiring significant capacity to implement and take forward. The most significant issue, however, the third part of this, is there's going to have to be a really major service review around in relation to the Children and Young People's Bill. That's now been introduced to Parliament. It will work its way through legislation and will have an impact on not only how education delivers, but through health and social work around how we deliver the early years agenda. That will need a major review, which will come to you in terms of scope, capacity, and we would want that to be agreed by this committee and others. So those are the 4 areas, that 1 that's to come that will follow the new template, and 3 that were already in existence. In other areas of savings, it wouldn't necessarily be a review. And again, Councillor Nicholson, you asked me the question, I'm just trying to answer that. If, for example, one of the savings relates to less teachers in secondary schools or bigger class sizes, that's not a service review. A lot of the things that we might have to do in education are not about reviewing how you deliver the service. So it's really more to do with the relevance of where savings might come from in relation to whether something is a complete service review, and that was the approach we've taken.
Thank you. Before I bring Councillor Nicholson back in, I suppose we're also slightly dictated by things like the Draft Commission on Rural Education and the finalisation of that, and how that could have an impact in the future, and a number of other, pardon me, Scottish Government initiatives that we don't yet have the finite detail of. And I think that's one of the difficulties with education. Until the Scottish Government set their targets and their budgets, we're sort of playing a bit of catch-up on that basis as well, presumably. Yeah. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, and thanks for that answer, Colin. But one of the things is, I know there's lots of service reviews going on, cluster schools, learning towns, others, you've said that. The actual decision of the council was to have service reviews. Now, but what I'm saying is, none of these service reviews that you mentioned have came forward to this committee with savings of 5%, 10%, 15%. Now, that was there's a clear new budget process and how things have got to go in the future. Now, to me, the Education Department is one of the ones that's just ignoring that. You're not the only one, but one of the ones that's just ignoring that new process. And we can't keep doing that year by year basis budget. We can't keep doing that. So that's why we had a new budget process. Them reviews that you talked about, as I said, don't come up with 5, 10, 15% savings, which will then give us details about which way politically and how we want to see the direction going. So, you know, you can quote all of them if you want, but you're not following the process.
Thank you for that. I'll ask Mr Crichton to come in at this stage.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, the position the Council agreed, as all members are aware, is primarily a two-pronged approach to the budget in relation to looking at savings. Firstly, service committees would in fact consider service reviews, and as has been indicated, some committees have taken that approach, and in this case the explanation from the Director sets out the reasons why that approach has varied differently. But just as important, the budget process was quite clear that including the service reviews, following service committees, decisions in future would be taken through political groups, providing any additional direction to officers and CMT on, firstly, service priorities on areas of service budget to be protected, and secondly, any additional areas of service budget where savings have to be sought for over and above service reviews, including the level of savings, etc. In overall terms, this committee still has the ability to take decisions in terms of requesting service reviews being undertaken, and indeed that's a decision open to this committee at any time, and therefore if that decision was taken, there would be a report back to this committee in terms of the scope and the outcomes expected from such a review.
Thank you for that clarification. Follow-up, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. I think that clears it up. It can do the reviews as well as, not instead of. So the decision of the council still stands. I mean, it's just not going through the process. The milestone 1, for example, the start date, decision to review committee, 18th October 2012. Milestone 2, the phase 2, agreeing the service review scope, complete by 9th of July. Milestone 3, phase 3, the service review, complete by 30th September. So we're not, on and on until you actually get to the budget day when everything's complete. And this is just completely ignoring that. You can do the other reviews as well as, or whatever, but there is a complete process. And, I think it's a bit of contempt that the Education Committee is being treated like this.
Thank you very much. I think your comments have been taken on board. I think from my perspective, though, we have to be very aware that it's the members that need to lead what we want to see as service reviews. We don't want directors and officers bringing forward what they want to see as service reviews. So I think...
Chair, you're absolutely right, and I think that was the point I was making, that if that had been here, then it's the political direction after that. But until you get stage 1, you can't go to stage 2, which is then as in the direction.
Absolutely, but I think the point is that if we want to request a review of a specific area of the service and we want to look at the budget spend within that service, that's in our gift to do that. And I think we've had clarification that the political groups can do that as well with a report back to this committee. I think the Director has given a very good overview of the reviews that we've carried out over the past 18 months, 2 years, and where we will be going forward with future reviews. But if anybody wants to request additional reviews over and above, as long as they're reasonable, I think that's the thing that we should be considering doing. So I completely agree. Have we finished on the secondary education? Are we moving on to children's integration? Yep. Councillor McComb, was it on the secondary education?
Chair, can you confirm that the spend per pupil for secondary pupils in Dumfries and Galloway is above the national average?
I'll ask the director to confirm.
Chair, happy to confirm that. The spend per pupil in secondary schools is, I'll be in the detail, but certainly we're ranked as 27th out of 32, which in terms of towards the top end of cost. So it's well above the national average.
The point I'm trying to make here is there an error there on page 49.
It looks like there may be an error because it's not possible for us to be 27th out of 32 and actually spending less money. So we'll check that out for you. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you very much for picking that up. Councillor McKee?
Sorry, Chair. It's just kind of general questions on these budgets. Vehicle allowance mileage, this is under primary schools. 121,000. Is that private car use or is that pool car use? Because obviously there's I don't know what the cost will be there. It must be pretty
Can you give
horrendous.
us the page that you're looking at, Councillor McKee?
Well, I'm using the appendix that was sent separate. It's in colour, and unfortunately, with the colour, you lose the numbers. You can't have everything in this world, you know. We're trying to make savings. It's the primary school budget I'm looking at, in specific, but it relates to them all.
Page 51.
And telecommunications, I thought there was a new telecommunications system being included here, and is supposedly going to be cheaper. You could call all other schools, it wouldn't cost you a penny. But it's £7,960 here for, and this is only in primary schools. So it was just in a general, why the high mileage and travel, and as the telecommunications been sorted out, and that'll do me the other ends in the next section, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Karen? Can I take that?
Oh.
Can I take that?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Thanks. Yes, the mileage, the staff mileage is their private cars, in that the teaching staff, peripatetic teaching staff, ASL staff who move from school to school, they have an entitlement to use their own car. We are currently discussing that with Harry Thompson. I think papers have come to members relatively recently regarding that. It's certainly something that we're working on reducing, and you can see from the previous report that the mileage is certainly being reduced quite significantly. In terms of the telephony costs, yes, you can phone school to school at a very, very cheap rate, but schools also phone out with schools, so they'll be phoning parents, they'll be phoning other people. So again, we're working on it. There's still room for manoeuvre, but these are costs that primary schools incur.
That's fine. It's just that I thought the system that was coming in was going to make it so much cheaper for everybody, both internal and external, but that's the world we're in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nicholson, is it on the secondary education?
No. I want to jump back a few pages.
Oh! Go on then.
It's on page 37 actually. It indicates in there we've got average, it's just because of the size of the papers, you know, and the detail in it. We've got average class size of 22 pupils. However, you know, obviously with the sheer number of very small rural schools, with class sizes well below this, what does this actually mean for schools within the town? Do they have class sizes well above that figure? That's one. And then in the same page it is, you know, there's a bands 5 to 9 posts. There's an increase of band 5 to 9 posts. I think it's 281 from 265 last year and 151 in 2011-12. These are figures from previous ABB. You know, what accounts for this increase? And on page 40, and that's the three of them, can we have a breakdown by school of cost per pupil, as these average figures didn't actually tell you anything?
Can I answer the third point? It's public information. The cost per pupil per school is actually on the public. I can certainly get that to you. We do calculate that, and we can get that. It's published regularly.
I'd appreciate
Director,
that.
on the first 2 points, the banding and the 22 average.
Yeah, the on the 22 average, it's simply bound to be the case, and this is just using the obvious maths, but you're absolutely right that we do have, particularly across some of our small schools, even smaller class sizes than 22, and that where a school is run more efficiently, for want of a better word, we will have some class sizes above that. No class sizes can go above 25 for P1, and no class size can go above 25 for any composite. But there are some class sizes, particularly in bigger schools, which are usually obviously de facto in a town, you're quite right, that will be more than that.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to... Sorry? Oh,
yeah. Well, actually, I mean, this has come through iTrent. We're quite clear that there certainly haven't been significant addition of staff in our service, but the way it's measured or the way it's taken at the moment includes vacancies. We think there's a wee bit of double counting there potentially. We know that we've taken £9 million out of the service over the last 3 years and have made all of those savings, and quite a significant amount of that has been staff. So we're absolutely clear that we haven't increased our number of staff. However, this accounts for vacancies at different times. I don't know whether Dr. Bryson can add to that or not.
Gillian?
I'm reflecting back on the business plan. I mean, comparatively, there are 101 vacancies sitting on the business plan compared to that figure of 289. So certainly that raised an eyebrow with us when we looked at this information that came from HR. I think it is the vacancies. We're fairly sure that it is because, as we say, we're spending less on our staffing, so we assume we have less staff.
Can we get that information? Can clarity? That's great, thank you. Okay, moving on to children's integration.
Okay, just to say children's integration then, that's the 2.5 million. It's a statutory duty of the Children's Scotland Act. It supports the delivery of the GIRFEC plan, and it commits to a variety of funding of partners and funding initiatives, including child protection, looked after children in need, early intervention and parenting. Quite a bit of detail in the pages themselves. Any questions around that one?
Councillor McKee?
No witness to speak today. Could you interpret that for me, please?
The me's.
Certainly, Councillor, I'll do my best if you can remind me of the page, and in fact I'll try to do it without looking in colour. If you take the bottom right-hand box, what that's telling you is that overall there is a high number of pupils who live in the 20% most deprived areas. What it tries to do is look at what coincidence that has with the number of looked after children on the top box, and on the left-hand box, those children with additional support needs. Okay, so one example would be that there are actually 53 children. If you look at the middle section, there are 53 children who are looked after, have ASN needs, and live in the areas with 20% most deprivation. Okay, that's what that means for all three. Another point might be the 315 number. What that's telling you is that there are 315 children who are looked after and have ASN needs, but actually don't live in the bottom 20%. Okay, so that box was that's an attempt graphically to allow you to see how things coincide or don't.
I think we all appreciate that clarification. It's quite useful now that we understand exactly what it means. Any other members on children's integration? No? Okay, moving on.
Okay, on other ASL, now this is an area which is categorised as work, although it goes on in school, it's from beyond school, so the sort of mainstream support in schools that constitutes ASL support within school, teachers, etc., is not included in this figure. The other ASL covers activities provided by peripatetic staff working with individuals with specific needs across D&G, and the narrative in the ABB provides a list of services provided along with the number of users for each service. I think the number of users is quite an interesting aspect. If I can find the page. Thank you. So, for example, the primary behaviour support service, again, the number of users has stayed relatively closely similar to the previous year, but has gone down slightly. Where the sort of biggest changes have been is around YPSS. There's been significantly more users of YPSS, but YPSS has been very successful, and actually that's been about how we operate with more group work and getting more sort of opportunities for kids to become involved. Overall, however, you will see that probably most of the services there that are listed have roughly the same proportion of users year on year.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Lever.
Yeah, the section dealing with residential, I mean, I remember we committed the £315,000 to move that forward in terms of having in-region residential facilities. Will we be getting a progress report? Because obviously that's pushing a lot of money out of our region into other regions, which would be better kept in region, and would be better for the children as well. So where are we in terms of the timescale for the residential facility?
I'll answer that, Karen, shall I? So, Jeff, I do apologise. Could you ask the question again briefly?
On the unnumbered sheet, page 59, it makes reference to the £315,000 from the Change Fund to support the development of a local provision for the education of children and young people with autism. Where are we in terms of developing that facility?
Thanks. Yes, I can answer that. We have a project team set up, and this department, this committee, or possibly full council, agreed to monies going forward in policy development. In terms of policy development, we've been able to appoint or certainly advertise for and second a project officer to come out of school to oversee that. We've got agreement from health and social work in our own service for a team of people to come together. At the moment, the plan is to consider what will best constitute that sort of service. What we're looking at having is effectively 3 support bases across Dumfries and Galloway. Currently, in terms of autism, a lot of our learning support centres facilitate and provide for youngsters with autism, and it's when we're no longer able to cope that those kids end up going out of the authority. We want to break that mould and change that. What we want to do is have 3 learning centres effectively, one in the east and one in the west, which have got additional expertise in there, so that some kids who might have been on the edge of leaving are able to stay. But the really significant part is also to provide one in the centre, which would also have residential opportunities. So it's actually what's being developed at the moment are the details around what would be provided, and we needed to be really clear that we don't go off as an individual service and try to plan on that. So we've been putting together the project team that involves social work and health. The next stage will be to come forward with very specific proposals around any build issues. It may well be we can use an existing facility, for example. The timescale at the moment, because of some of the delays in the recruitment, I think the timescale is such that we would probably bring a report in front of you, hopefully within 6 months, in terms of progress towards that.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor McKee.
Yeah, just on the Sederunt House, the Royal Blind School and various other behavioural, how much is education, how much is social work? We're no double counting here, or it's not a case of it's 102,000 average cost per year and another 102,000 for social work. But is the budget split, or is that the total budget?
Director. Oh, Karen.
In respect of the sort of the Sederunt House and the Royal Blind School, we pay all of the educational costs, and as far as I know, I don't think there's any of those split between education and social work, but some of the behavioural placements are split between the two services. So the top two are purely education-based pupils.
Chair, if I can come in, but for clarity, there will be other costs. Social work have costs in addition to these ones. These are the educational costs here.
Can you clarify educational costs? Overnight, obviously they're there 7 days a week, I assume, or 5 days a week and home at weekends. Is the residential part paid by social work, or are you paying the whole lot of that?
My understanding, Councillor, is that it depends on the nature of the provision and who has recommended it. If there's a health element to it and a residential element, if that's the bulk of it, then social work pay that cost. If the bulk of it is educational, we'll pick up the whole thing, even if there are other costs. What we've been doing, though, recently, and I think we reported this fairly recently, is looking to pool the budgets between education and social work around this agenda so that we make the best decisions for the young people, best value decisions as well, to be honest with you, because having totally separate budgets around that doesn't make sense. So at the moment, we've got a small group looking at how we could pool the historical budget that's gone to it from education and social work. We would like health to be involved, I have to say, in terms of contributions, but at the moment they haven't tended to contribute to that agenda.
I think it's a very valid point. I think it's something that definitely needs looked at. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, moving on to strategic management and support services.
Okay, so there are several major chunks to this one. The one significant part of the overall, roughly 20 million, is the 14.4 million for 14.496 for PPP unitary charge. This is on page 66. The table at the bottom, I think, gives the best sort of indication of how this money is spent. There's 14.4 for the PPP. The 3.871, which is the directorate, that's my own team and all of the education officers and all of the administrative support that's out there, officers right across the council that support members and support schools. And then the other chunk of it comes to approximately 3.5 million, which is parts to do with ICT, Curriculum for Excellence, music instruction, outdoor education, and that's how that 22 million is split up. So it covers all centrally based services providing management support and performance data to all schools in the region. And, as I say, it provides cross-region support, but a significant part of the 22 million is the PPP unitary charge.
Just picking up on that particular page, the music instruction, and it's got a net expenditure of 904,000 for this academic year. My understanding is that since we've reduced or took the fees away altogether, we've had in excess of 500 additional applications for music instruction over and above what we've had in previous 2-3 years, which is fantastic. But are we allowing for that within that budget, or is that a historic budget that we've just brought forward?
It is at the moment a historic budget, and therefore there wouldn't be an increase in staffing around that. It simply might mean that you work with bigger groups of children. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Councillor Nicholl.
Yeah, thanks. In that particular sector, I see that the directorate is generating income of 695,000. Are you moonlighting, or?
I'll ask my financial advisor how we do that.
Are we moonlighting?
That'll be the income for the EMA payments.
Educational maintenance allowance. It's for senior pupils, they get a weekly allowance. If they come below a certain family income.
So for clarity, we pay that, Councillor, we pay those educational maintenance allowances out to young people, but the government give us the money for it. So that comes under the income agenda. It's not a net profit. It only effectively only covers what we pay. In fact, it doesn't quite cover what we pay.
I was going to suggest you do more of it.
Okay, I have Councillor Witts and then Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. I refer to the bottom of page 68, leadership development, and I understand what it's said here. It seems to be emphasis on succession planning. So I presume it's not subsequent to qualification for headship, or is that? I haven't heard much of qualification for headship lately. Obviously, that's a different beast in terms of for individual development, but this is obviously to fit in for succession planning. I presume the emphasis is there. Am I right in my assumption?
Absolutely. The reason you haven't heard very much regarding the qualification for headship is that it's certainly part of a national review. SQH, there is a new National Leadership Academy currently being scoped, and we are part of that scoping process to find out whether or not a master's qualification for head teachers is in fact the right way forward. They should make some decisions within the next year. Certainly our internal leadership development programme is going to GTC next week for formal accreditation, which I think is really a strong move forward. We do a lot of in-house support for our young teachers, our aspirational teachers, and to have that kite marked and accredited by the GTC would be really positive. No matter what happens with SQH, it'll stand them in good stead to have that nationally accredited. But you're absolutely right, this is pre-SQH, and then depending on whatever happens for qualification for headship, it will prepare them adequately.
Councillor Woods.
So there's nothing here about SQH. Are we marking any people in the system for SQH, or are they marking time, or it's obviously not come up as an expenditure item unless I've missed something?
Dr. Bryson?
Yes, SQH was agreed as a saving for this year in terms of new input, so we have no new entrants to the SQH programme this year, but we do have 5 recent graduates and 5 current graduates. So there is a bit of a marking time until we clarify the national position.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKee?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a brief comment on music instruction. I was at a school awards evening a couple of weeks ago, and I think they've got 2 or 3 bands there now, and they're absolutely tremendous. So I'd certainly encourage that. The question I'd like to ask, Chair, is regards GLOW ICT, and there's mention in here of the usage. Are you comfortable that we're getting value for money with that? I've spoken to a student who says they use a different system, Edmodo. So I don't know who Edmodo is, but it appears that the students and teachers prefer that to GLOW. Can you throw any light on that, or can you help it to glow a bit?
Director.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Again, quite a complex issue. GLOW, the beauty of GLOW was that it was I need to get my technology right here, but I mean it was a Scottish-wide intranet, and it was very, very secure for young people, okay? And very, very secure in terms of the corporate TS, in the sense that it wouldn't be possible for people to use GLOW and introduce a virus to the whole system, for example. Okay, so it's very, very secure. The downside with GLOW is that it's somewhat out of date and a bit clunky, and although the government have been trying to improve it, and although all authorities have been trying to use it well, there's no doubt that, you know, to some extent it doesn't measure up to what young people are using when they go home at night and go into any system, okay? There's a two-pronged approach here. We are promised, and I expect to see it, a really significant change and improvement in what GLOW looks like in due course, a sort of son of GLOW. So we expect a big difference there. But the other issue is that schools and youngsters are desperate to be able to use their own devices. And so to some extent, you know, if a young person is able to use a smartphone, or able to use an iMac, or able to use, you know, a tablet, they get frustrated when they come into school and can't actually access. What we're running is a number of pilots at the moment, and some of that relates to Edmodo. The difficulty there is that whilst it gives absolute access to pupils for anything they want, if they take materials home where we haven't actually covered through security or encrypted things, then the council could be open to the data protection problems. So it can sound really simple for schools and kids saying, why can't I just use the Wi-Fi at school and use my own device? What we're trying to do is figure out a way to do that safely and securely and we're trying to work on that agenda. So it's quite complex moving forward. No authority's got the answer to that. Everybody's trying to figure out how to give kids a lot more access, but keep it secure at the same time.
That's fine. I think security is a big issue without a doubt. And it's no case of if they can work the things, they can work them. There's no problem there. They come and tell us quick enough how to sort things.
For sure. Councillor Gilroy.
That was exactly what I was going to ask about, because I think there might come a time when we say, actually, it's however much you might want to have it, if it's not being used, it's hardly cost effective, I would have thought. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think that point's been taken on board, and I think certainly once the new software's up and running, if we don't see a significant uptake and usage of it, we will maybe have to have a review of that particular thing. Councillor Nicholson?
I think Councillor Levers is on Glow, so if you don't mind, you can go.
It's just got, well, as far as I can see, there's just the Glow ICT budget rolled up to 697,000. What's the actual expenditure on Glow itself, taking into account? Councillor Gilroy.
Councillor, off the top of my head, I don't know. I know that it's significantly less than the 697, and if we can take a note of that, I can easily get that information to you by early next week. No problem.
What was the specific?
That's specifically what's spent on Glow. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that. On page 72, the cost to the region pupils has risen from £106,000 in 2012-13 to 151 in 2013-14. Could you tell us the reason for this increase? On page 73, this is going back to the PPP payments. They've increased by about £400,000 per year. Could you tell us the reason why the increase is? And in relation to the payments to outside bodies, how many of these are actually commission services or long-term contracts that haven't been reviewed in some time? And do we have a timetable on commissioning within the department?
Dr. Bryson?
Yeah, we certainly have a timetable for commissioning for most of the internal commissions. I am aware that there are some long-term contracts, such as payments to NHS and to the one that springs to mind, and I do apologise for the pun, is the trampolining. We have a PE equipment commission, which we have. I think that could do with being reviewed. So these are relatively small arrangements that we have with local contractors, but certainly the main commissions have a regular either 1 or 3 year review period.
Director?
Yeah, and on payments to other bodies, Councillor, it's regularly reviewed. You might remember 2 years ago we reduced payments to Cranog from a contract that was, I think, 1,200 to, was 1.2 million, to 800,000, and it's under regular review. It's yearly. It was a. In theory, it's a 3 year contract, but we can give 6 months' notice. And what happened was that we were at 1.2 million, and as part of savings, either last year or the year before, we reduced that to 800,000. We're again looking at that and reviewing with them whether that's going to be the best, the right level of payment in the future, and that would come forward as a possibility around savings options in due course. The question on the PPP, I'm simply assuming that's how the financial model operates in relation to the sinking fund, in relation to how the financial model operates over the 30 years. That's as much as I could say about the PPP. Well, no, it probably will be. Again, I can ask for details on the contract from Rona or from Paul Garrett, but my assumption is it's a financial model over 30 years that won't be exactly the same every year.
I think Mr. Crichton's noting this down, and we'll get clarification on the additional 400,000 in this financial year. First one, Councillor Nicholson. Sorry, microphone. Can you repeat the question? Thank you.
So, the cost of the out-of-region pupils is risen from £106,000 in 2012-13 to 151 in 13-14.
That could just be one pupil, or even less than that sometimes.
Can you get back to us with that as well? Just
Okay. It will simply be the fees haven't gone up significantly in these out-of-reach placements, out-of-region placements, but all it takes is for example, one child to reach the end at somewhere that was cheaper and somebody to suddenly go somewhere else that's significantly more. So it's likely to be around 1 or 2 children, but we'll get that detail to you also.
Councillor McClung?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's page 76, 082, payments to other bodies. NHS payments, you've got public health nurse, 23,000 to the NHS for 50% of the area-based public health nurse in North Dumfries. While I don't have a problem with paying for a public health nurse in Dumfries, I would take it that's because of the deprivation in that area. There are other areas in this council that are as bad in the multiple index of deprivation than North Dumfries. And the second one, the other payments to services, I'll resist the obvious joke for the grow your own social worker, but I take it that's a contribution for social work specifically for children. We're not paying for social work for any other than children.
That's correct. The Children's Instigation Service and initially ring-fence money that we got from the government several years ago was all designed to improve partnership working, and therefore quite a lot of the payments don't go into education but go to health and social work, and to an extent it's those other bodies that decide how the money is spent there.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I have no further members wishing to speak, so I think we can move to the recommendations. I think we've already done 2.1. Sorry, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, just a general point. I maybe expected it in the summary, but it was included in the secondary education stats. It was just the ongoing situation we have heard for a number of years, and it was confirmed earlier that the drop in school rolls, this predicted 20%, you can see from the evidence there on page 43 of 82 that obviously, from 2000 we dropped to about 18,000, or predicted about 18,000. But we have been told, that although there's got to be like a £500-600 projected reduction over the next 5 years, it looks to have kind of plateaued out now. I think what would be helpful, though, because it does say there that the decreasing numbers in secondary schools is offset by the increasing number in primary schools, but I think for information, it'd be interesting to see the numbers and projecting numbers for P1 through to secondary as part of information going forward.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving to the recommendations. We've already done 2.1, so I think that's fine. Before we go on to 2.2, I think there was a number of issues that were picked up by Mr. Crichton. If you want to give us a brief overview, including a future report on use of PPP, in fact, all schools for community use. I'll let you give a brief overview.
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding is the areas that come back to as an action to members is firstly the budget analysis profile that the Director provided at the start of today's meeting. Secondly, an action that we need to have public awareness in relation to community use of schools, the outstanding future report on school-let management and administration, the issue by Councillor Diggle in relation to income generation from biomass boilers, the detailed breakdown of the school exclusions, breakdown and analysis, the pupil cost per school increase raised by Councillor Nicholson, the breakdown of total expenditure on GLOBE by Councillor Gilroy and McKee, the school PPP financial model and the reason for the difference this financial year, the ASL question in terms of the increase in expenditure by Councillor Nicholson, and finally the school roll projection information by Councillor Marshall. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Nicholson?
Thanks. I'd also like to note about our disquiet about the service review aspect and not having the service review information here to actually go through that first.
I think we've taken that very much on board, and as I say, I think if there's any future reviews required, we will ensure that that comes to this committee. But we have an undertaking from the Director that some reviews have been done and other reviews will be coming forward, particularly on the back of the Children and Young People's Bill.
the point I was making was you can have as many reviews as you want, but the process is to have the service reviews here. Now, and you have options to that, and then the political decision can be taken. And without that, you can't have that.
No, I appreciate that, and I think they are options, and if appropriate, they would have been here, but they're clearly not here because they're not required at this particular stage. They've either been done or they will be done in the future. No, it's up to us, absolutely. I've given that assurance.
No, it's not up to the Education Committee to rewrite the budget process. The Education Committee is ignoring the budget process.
Chair, can I come in here, because I think it's really important in terms of integrity that I'm very, very clear that whether there's a misunderstanding or a different interpretation of the process seems to be quite important here. My understanding is that where we considered there was a need for a service review that might lead to savings, that must come before this committee and the full scope be generated, and that's what we've stuck to. What I've said at the moment is that we've got a number of other reviews that are ongoing. There will be a major review coming around early years, but for all other savings, the likelihood, we believe, is that it wouldn't be so much a service review, which would be about how you deliver, but it's more likely to be around efficiency or reduction. So just to be absolutely clear, because there's certainly no intent to treat this committee with contempt, I was clear that at the moment, none of the agenda items in terms of moving forward just now would be about full service reviews. But if we have a full service review, then of course that would come to you for scoping out. And that was the position we'd taken as a service.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I think with that, we'll go to 2.2, which was to review and agree the Education Services Budget 2013 as detailed at Appendix 2 to this report. And in addition, we have all the points noted by Mr Crichton for action and for further information from members, and that will be emailed out to members as soon as possible. Are we happy? Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 7. Thank you very much, Karen. I think you're excused now, aren't you? I'll give you a moment. Okay, moving on to item 7, John Wallace Trust. I think this is about the 17th time we've had it here. The first report, number 7, is basically about the process for the administration of the fund. Dr Bryson, do you have anything further to add to the report?
No, I'm just pleased that we have clarity that the business of the Trust is referred to Education Committee, as it states in 4.5. Our legal advice is that in the terms of the Trust deed, there's no provision to appoint ward members as trustees, but there is a commitment that there will be inquiries made to the possibility and costs, and we'll bring this information back to Education Committee. It's proposed that will be in September when we start to look at next year's allocations. From my point of view, the paper here today is in 2 parts. The first is to seek permission in terms of the administration of the Trust, and secondly, it's the catch-up meeting from prior year applications, and we will bring forward next year's applications in September with the approval of members.
Thank you very much for that. Are members happy to note the recommendations at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4? Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, item 8, I have no further business at this time. So moving on to item 9, Local Government Scotland Act 1973, to consider the adoption of a